All right, Rick, I know you're out there, and there you are.
Oh,
Hi, hello, everyone. Welcome back. I think it's been a little while since we've had an event. So we are very grateful for you to returning as we came back. And we hope you had a good Thanksgiving and that you are ready for another great event because we're very excited to have Juan Enriquez with us today. My name is Ann Merchant, and I work for the National Academy of Sciences, and I am joined by.
I'm Rick Lovert. I'm the program director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange, a program of the National Academy of Sciences.
Exactly. And so, of course, we want to start by explaining that the National Academy of Sciences is a private nonprofit institution in Washington, D.C. It's very confusing because even today, somebody had said to me, well, with the power of the federal government behind you, given that you are a federal institution, we're like, we always hate to tell people and stop the mid sentence to say, no, that's not who we are. But we were created by Abraham Lincoln to sit outside that framework of the federal government. And I was saying to Rick today that we have a couple of new reports, one of which has been making headlines. I always have to kind of look at my notes to where you see my eyes go to the side because I want to get it right. It's the assessment of illnesses at overseas embassies. And if you will recall that there were reports of illnesses at both the embassies in China and in Havana. And so the academies released a report saying that there was some evidence for the plausible role of directed pulsed radio frequency energy. They're not saying that that was conclusive, and they're saying that there needs to be more investigation, but it was making headlines this week, as is the continued headlines for the work that we are doing on the framework for the rollout of vaccines for COVID-19. So that continues to be very relevant. So that's the kind of work that we do. We're constantly thinking about the ways in which science, engineering, and medicine can be the basis for good policy that we can set for the nation. We have two rapid expert consultations that were released that are COVID related. One, and they're both relating to the safety of college campuses during the pandemic. One is the encouraging protective COVID behaviors among college students, and the other is COVID testing strategies for colleges and universities. So all of these are available on our website. They're free to download and for you to take a look at and to read without cost. And there's a lot of other material out there as well. We're not just COVID related, but it's a lot of what we're doing right now. And so, of course, there's a lot of these big, huge reports that come out on a regular basis, and that's what the main work of this institution is about. But not everybody wants to read a 400-page report or even some of the 8 and 4 pagers that go along with them. And so that's what the Science and Entertainment Exchange was created for. And so, Rick, maybe you'd like to give a couple of sentences and talk about what the exchange is and does.
I mean, to be clear, some of our reports are total beach reading.
Total.
So the Science and Entertainment Exchange, if you are a writer, producer, studio executive, storyteller of any kind in a mass media format, like a feature film, TV show, video game, you have a question about science, you can call us and we will connect you with an expert for free. Sachi down there in the chat is giving you that info, so you don't have to write it down. You can just cut and paste. I want to just take a quick second and say thank you to everybody all in our audience who took our survey. We had 777 people respond, and if I were a superstitious person, I would say that bodes well for 2021. So thank you very much. So over the course of our history since 2008, the Exchange has done over 300 events, over 3,200 consults on films like Avengers: Infinity Steel, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, and more recently Songbird. And if you're a STEM professional and this is your first time hearing about the work we do, please do contact us. By the way, if you have written us, emailed us, we're going to get to you. I had a number of volunteers through doing these events. Forgive me if you're hearing my 2-year-old background. It's a pandemic. Really quickly, I want to thank Ameche for doing the AV today because we couldn't do this event without you. Thank you. And also the whole team in DC for your help. Courtney Sloan, Jeff Fishman, and then in Los Angeles, Sachi Gerben. I also need to thank our sponsors, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, who paid for this event today. So thank you especially. Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Walt Disney Company, Film Nation, Google, the Lyda Hill Foundation, Corteva, and individual donors like many of you. For everybody who joined at the supporter level, you will be getting one of these. By the way, just to be really clear on this, it's cumulative, and a lot of you are either really close or just surpassed the $100 level over the course of 2020. So we will send you one of these, and also we will, for our VIP Q&A sessions, you will have access for a year to those too. So you can ask your questions with your face on screen. So thank you for that. So if you do have questions today, there's also a moderated Q&A that will happen during the event itself. So if you have a question at any time, you can write your question down here, and I'm going to be fielding as many of those as humanly possible. We're going to get through as many as we can. We always have more questions than time, and I'm sorry. We do the best we can with the questions as they're coming through. But if you do have a question for Juan today, then please put it down there, and we'll get to as many as we can. And I think that's it. That's all I got. Back to Anne.
Well, I think that, we always want to also kind of reference some things that are non-academies, non-work related, because we're not all business all the time. One of the things that I saw this week that came out today, it's the New York Times Year in Photographs. And so I highly recommend that. It's really, sometimes, it's the old expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And the challenge that the New York Times set for anybody who takes a look at them, because they've done them by month, is to pick one from every month that is especially resonant for you. It's really hard to pick 12, but as they pointed out, 2020 is one of those years that will go down in history. And so a lot of those photographs are really resonant. And so I found that just a really wonderful thing to spend time on this morning while I was drinking my coffee.
Oh, is it my turn now?
Your turn, totally your turn.
So the thing that I wanted to draw people's attention to was that the AFI has a list of the 100 greatest holiday movies of all time. If you have an IMDb subscription, you can look at all 100. If you don't, you can look at their top 20. And I just wanted to point out a terrific triumvirate of holiday movies: Gremlins, Die Hard, and Scrooged. Yes, if you are tired of watching White Christmas and It's a Wonderful Life, I would recommend it.
Well, there you go. That's quite a collection. All right. So, you can watch a picture worth 1,000 words, and then you just go watch some movies. So it's what we're all about.
I should say, sorry, AFI acronyms. I hate acronyms. American Film Institute, which is a very prestigious group.
Exactly. But of course, in the meantime, we have something great for you. And it's always our privilege to think about the folks that we put on our stage. And it's been especially our privilege during our virtual event cycle to be able to think about the people that we don't have to sort of impinge upon too much of their time to ask them to get on an airplane. And sometimes we know how busy people are. And I guess that's one of the advantages we've had during the pandemic is that, but it's going to be so easy for you. All you have to do is stay in your living room and then just give us a little bit of time on Zoom. And so Juan Enriquez is one of those people whom we've always wanted on our stage. And interestingly, as I was in a meeting with Marcia McNutt, our president, and we were talking about what's coming on the exchange stage. And I was saying, well, next up will be Juan Enriquez. She said, Anne, I'm reading his book. It's fantastic. And I figured, well, we could get no better endorsement for what the Science and Entertainment Exchange is doing that when our president says that we have put exactly the right person on our stage because she thinks that the book is fantastic. So, we don't do better than that. So Juan, we are so happy that you are here. We are really looking forward to, we've seen your slides, but as is often the case with some of the best slides, there's not words on there. There's just these fantastic pictures, and you're going to give us the words that go with them. And so we know that, I think we teased it for our audience. This is going to be a thought-provoking conversation, and I know that you're going to have lots of questions. So we're going to let you take it from here, and Rick and I are going to disappear, and we're going to be listening very carefully.
Thanks a lot, Juan.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. This is my favorite audience, mixing entertainment and film and music and TV and all media. And so let's just try and make this entertaining. Um, most ethics are some of the most boring subjects on the planet. Because what you end up doing is you end up talking about right and wrong, and you get this HR manual, and the HR manual tells you everything you already know. Don't do this, do that. And that's not where right wrong gets interesting. Right wrong gets interesting when it changes, and it gets interesting when technology gets involved. And so what I'd like you to think about is what happens if right and wrong changes over time? And you may think you know the right thing. And of course, 99% of people are decent human beings, and they want to do the right thing. And they want their kids to grow up knowing the right things, and they want to do the right thing at school and at work. But as you're thinking about this stuff, imagine you had a time machine, as many of you have put into television and film and other media. And that time machine takes you back. Well, if you show up with the Mayans, they would be practicing human sacrifice. And they thought not only was that a good thing to do, a legal thing to do, but the sun wouldn't rise if that didn't happen, and the rains wouldn't come. And as you're thinking about the French, the streets of Paris, the various parks in Paris were filled with public executions. So if you take that time machine, you show up in Paris, you'd see the little kids eating lunch and watching, and mom would be telling them, watch, watch, they're about to guillotine the person. And of course, that was legal, and that was entertaining, and that was normal. And we look back at that and kind of think, what in the world were these people thinking? And if you want to get into one of the most controversial subjects of today, and you want to talk about serfdom, indentured servitude, slavery, it's really important to understand that this took place in the US and in India and in China and in Africa and in Greece and in Rome and in every other civilization. In fact, the word Slav are the people who live to the south of Russia and Scandinavia because they were the slave classes. And so that leads to two questions. I don't think there's anybody on this call that would defend human sacrifice. I don't think there's anybody on this call that would defend guillotining people in public squares, even though sometimes we may be tempted these days. And I don't think there's anybody on this call that would ever think that slavery was right. And the answer is none of those things were right. So what were people thinking, and why did it last for so long? Why did slavery last for tens of thousands of years across so many cultures? And a really important question is, why did it go away so quickly? Because the legality of slavery, and I realize there's still slaves today, and I realize there's still horrible stuff going on today, but the legality of slavery was eliminated in most countries in decades. And one theory of the case is some very brave activists and abolitionists stuck their necks out and put their lives on the line to do away with this horrendous system, which is in no way justifiable ever. But alongside that, there may be a second theory of the case, which is it may not be a complete coincidence that slavery began to go away when we started using energy. Because a single barrel of oil contains the energy equivalent to 10 years of a person's labor. And when you tie that to machines and thousands of horsepower, all of a sudden you can produce what millions of people produce without having to put millions of people into indentured servitude or slavery or serfdom. And so in this instance, technology began to change the system, which was a millennial-old system, and began to displace that system. And one of the effects of that is a flat human lifespan, a lifespan that hadn't increased for thousands of years, suddenly doubled and tripled across most of the world. So here's a really weird instance where it's not technology coming in looking like the Terminator, it's technology coming in and actually enabling better behaviors. Because we can have more, we can have a better lifestyle and be far more generous to other people. And again, it doesn't justify in any way, shape, or form slavery or what went on previously, but it is an interesting transition. And of course, what I'm trying to say and put into your heads is that technology really often changes ethics. And technology is now moving at exponential rates. And therefore, you might expect to see exponential change in what we think is right and wrong. Because right and wrong changes across time. A lot of you had a lot to do with this change. So, gay marriage, majority against United States, 1997. Gay marriage today, majority for. Almost a 180-degree flip in the majority opinion. And yes, there were some early people who understood just how unjust this was, how horrible it was to treat people that way. But the majority did not in 1997. And when the AIDS crisis happens and people come out of the closet, and when you begin to portray the creativity and just humanity of this group that had been in the closet, and you put them in your songs, you put them in your films, you put them in your documentaries, you put them in your television shows, you humanize people and you bring them into the majority, into the living room, as part of us, not as the other. And so again, your technology, your work, flip the majority opinion and force some pretty abrupt changes. Because in 2010, then Cardinal Bergoglio thought that gay marriage was a destructive attempt against God's plan. And 3 years later, he said, "Who am I to judge?" And last month was in favor of civil unions, even though much of his global flock was not there yet. So you can see these 180-degree shifts in the position of what you think is right and wrong. What you've got to think about as you put together your entertainment, movies, documentaries for the next decade is what happens if many of you cause the shift, and what happens if what is okay today may be wrong tomorrow. So you look at a picture like this, album cover, and you know, there's a lot of weird stuff going on this album cover, right? There's a nun sitting in the window and it's a trailer park, and there's scantily clad women, and there's all kinds of stuff that you'd say, that's questionable. But possibly the most unethical part of this picture, the most shocking part of this picture in a couple of decades may be the fact that she's grilling, which is of course not the first thing that most of us go to today. And why would the majority opinion on that change? Right? The majority is not yet vegetarian, but in the measure that synthetic meat goes from $380,000 a hamburger to $9, and synthetic meats become faster, better, cheaper, and you had synthetic chicken announced last week, and you now have synthetic lobster, and you now have synthetic hamburgers, then the majority opinion on is it okay to slaughter billions of animals a year may shift from majority accepting to majority opposing. And when you do that, those scenes in your movies of people going to the fanciest steakhouse in New York or Los Angeles and walking past a rack of bloody meat on the shelves may look very different. Those scenes in your movies may have a completely different view from the majority of people. As you take your time machine and you go back across things like sex, imagine having a conversation with your dear old grandparents and talking about the birds and the bees. Well, if you talk to them about this and you explained what we take for granted, that you can have sex and not conceive a child, that would be completely weird to them. That would be completely wrong and amoral. If you talk to them about IVF and you explained that an egg and a sperm can come together, conceive a child without two people being in the same room, in the same state, in the same country, That's something that they were familiar with. They call that the Immaculate Conception. And it was miraculous. And you're now telling them that you were performing miracles on a constant basis. If you talk to them about surrogate motherhood, and you talk to them about frozen eggs and frozen embryos, you just had one that was born after decades. Well, in essence, what that means is you can have identical twins that are born decades apart. So you've decoupled sex from consequence, you've decoupled sex from physical contact, and you've decoupled sex from time. And your grandparents would have thought, this is incredibly weird and incredibly wrong. And you discuss this stuff over a latte. So as you think about going forward, now imagine having a conversation with your grandkids in 70 years and talking to them about sex. Well, you'd look at headlines like this about scandals in gene editing babies, and they might look at it 180 degrees different. They might say, Grandpa, Grandma, you were so primitive, you didn't even bother to edit my genome when I was an embryo. And because of that, I still carry a KRAS gene, I still carry a P53 gene, I still carry a BRCA gene, and I'm suffering from cancer, and you could have edited that out. How dare you have been so superstitious that you didn't edit my genome? And you may have a complete flip on this. The first synthetic womb, patented in 1955. Took a long time, but you can now conceive a little lamb inside basically a Ziploc bag and bring it to term. By the way, this led to one of the greatest headlines in the tabloid newspapers in Britain. This is a U, an E-W-E, and the headline was, "You get a womb," W-O-M-B. Very ingenious over in Britain. So here's the issue. When you take the position in politics or in morals or in anything else that you know right and everybody else who disagrees with you is wrong, you're creating a no man's land for any discussion. You're shooting anybody who disagrees with you. There's no evolution in thought, there's certainly no learning, and there's certainly no humor. And if ethics change over time, you may be right today and you may be wrong tomorrow. Or you might even be wrong today. So in these highly polarized times, what I'd like to have you understand is technology is exponential. Technology changes ethics. And ethics may start to change at exponential rates. And let me give you a few examples that I've been involved with. These are not science fiction. This is stuff that's actually happening. So a buddy of mine, Tony Atala, has been working at Wake Forest, and he's been working on organ regeneration. And so here's a thesis. You were born with no teeth. And let me tell you, your mother was very grateful. And then you grew a set of teeth, and then they started falling out. And you gave them to the tooth fairy. Tooth fairy left a couple of candies or something. And then you grew a second set of teeth. So you know how to grow teeth. You've done it twice. But most human beings, except lawyers, don't grow extra teeth. But if your body knows how to grow a full set of teeth and has done so once and has done so twice, why can't you program your body to grow it a third time or a fourth time or a fifth time? And the answer is you can. Because we're beginning to understand the human genome, so we're beginning to understand the programming language that leads to your growing an extra set of teeth. And what Tony's now doing is he's applying the same technology to growing all kinds of organs. He's already implanted a bladder. He's working on trachea. He's working on heart valves. He's working on kidneys. In fact, he's working on 32 organs. So it's very likely that in the medicine in the future, you will start swapping out your body parts, much as you swap out the kitchen cabinets, or the windows in your house, or the bath fixtures. A second technology that changes our concept of ethics and right and wrong is the ability to program life. This is one of the most exciting pictures ever taken. At least I think so. The company that I helped create, with a series of some of the world's greatest scientists, took all the genes out of a cell, inserted a new gene program, and created a new species. So what you're looking at here is the world's first programmable life form, which was the science discovery of the year. So we can now program life, much as we program a computer, except that this software makes its own hardware, which in a highly technical scientific term is a BFD. It's a big deal. One of the things that we're doing with this technology is we're creating printers. So we can now create basically desktop printers that print cells or that will print vaccines. And those cells will execute those programs and reproduce those programs, and those scale geometrically. This is something that I've not been involved with, but which is kind of fun, taking place at Harvard, which is the engineering department has been creating these really strange life forms based on putting together rat heart cells and rubber and gold, and these begin to move like little animals. So you're beginning to see these hybrid components of machines, and there's a lot of work going on with this stuff. Angie Belcher at MIT has done extraordinary stuff, building little viruses that operate as nano machines. One of the most interesting things going on is being led by this guy, a buddy of mine, Jack Szostak, has been thinking about the origins of life. And so what he's been doing is he told his graduate students, I want to understand if life is common on other planets, and the way to do it is to understand how life came to be on Earth and how often it came to be on Earth. And so he's been creating these little cells. And what he asked his graduate students to do at Harvard is build me cells that are alive, but only use instruments and components that were around 3 billion years ago. No microscopes, no tweezers, no reagents. Take the stuff that was there 3 billion years ago and build me a life. And the fascinating thing is the students were able to create the equivalent of a basic cell membrane out of almost detergent-like chemicals that existed 3 billion years ago. They were able to take the precursors of DNA and RNA and have those assemble. They were able to have those come into the cell and have the cell split apart. These are not yet self-reproducing organisms, but the basic components look like this. I'm holding them in the palm of my hand. And what does this imply? Well, this implies that Jack may be, maybe within weeks or months or decades, of creating life from scratch, of taking something that is non-living and turning it into a living creature using naturally occurring processes, which would mean that life is common on Earth, that it likely originated many times, that if it goes extinct, it would likely happen again, and probably that life is common in the universe. Let me close with the last concept. We assume ethics, and we assume our ethics are right and wrong. But there's a lot of game changers. If ethics were driven primarily by Chinese ethics and thought, which are more communitarian than individualistic, you might find a completely different concept of right and wrong. If ethics were driven by AI, how you program that AI and the parameters as to what you think is ethical and who does that may be completely different. Some people are thinking that there's a high likelihood of dozens of intelligent civilizations within our galaxy. If you ever contacted them, they would likely have a very different concept of right and wrong. So there's a lot of ways of flipping ethics within our own system and with other systems that are evolving. Because ethics can and do change over time, and technology changes ethics. So the next time that somebody comes into your office and is furious at something you said 10 seconds ago, 10 months ago, 10 years ago, or you are certain that you are right and you go out and you curse somebody, you have to remember that 98, 99% of people are trying to do the right thing. They may not have had the opportunities you have. They may not have been as educated as you are. That doesn't justify what our forefathers did. That doesn't justify what the founding fathers did. It doesn't make it right. But you too are going to be judged. I'm going to be judged. And we're going to be judged when the meaning of words, of actions, of photographs change in the future. So we need to revive two words that are very rarely used today: humility and forgiveness. Because if we don't have humility and forgiveness towards the past and towards those we disagree with today, we can't isolate the 1 or 2% who are truly unethical shits. They get covered by another 49% of people around them. It's really important we do this, because if you think that we can scrutinize the actions of Washington or Jefferson or anybody previously, Henry VIII, it is nothing compared to how we are going to be scrutinized. And you have to go back to one of the great writers of Latin America, de Borges. When the generals came after him and threatened him with torture or death, he laughed and he said, "How can you threaten me other than with death?" The interesting thing, the original thing, would be to threaten me with immortality. That's what would make him afraid. And here's the deal for all of us. You've been electronically tattooed by Google, by Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, your dating profiles. And that makes you famous historically to an extent, and makes you researchable historically to an extent that no generation has ever been researched before. And as the rules change, what you've posted, what you've done, the words may change meaning, the actions may change meaning. So let's hope that our descendants aren't quite as certain as we are that we are absolutely right and everybody who came before us was wrong. Again, not because what they were doing wasn't wrong, but because in the context of the time, many of us may have done the same thing. If we were brought up in that society, if we were educated in that society, if those were the norms of that society. And that's why it's so important to understand that ethics changes. And that's where ethics gets interesting. That's where ethics gets fun. And that's why it's a subject we should spend more time on. Thank you very much.
That was a fantastic. Thank you very much, Juan. And I'm going to dive right into questions because we have a ton of them. One question, I'm sort of distilling a few people's questions right here, but I think it kind of boils down to, could you spend a little bit of time talking about the interplay between religion and ethics over time as you see it?
So most people think that religion is the driver of ethics and ethical change. And you have to understand several things. First, 99% of religions have gone extinct. Anytime you go into an archaeology museum, a history museum, an art museum, you're mostly looking at dead gods. You're looking at Zeus, you're looking at Quetzalcoatl, you're looking at Zarathustra, you're looking at Shiva, whatever, right? And most of those religions have gone extinct. They're archaeological pieces or art pieces or, X symbols of things that people would sacrifice humans for or give their lives for. The second thing is technology fundamentally changes religions often. It's not just Galileo and his telescope. One of the really interesting expanses of religions was Islam. And certainly it was better organized, it had a better bureaucracy, it had better weapons, but it's really important to understand that Islam spread in decades across broad swaths of the world after the Justinian plagues. Because here was a society that said, never bathe. And here's another society that says, you have to wash your hands, face, and feet 5 times a day. Well, if you're praying to God to protect you from the plague, guess which group is on average going to get more protection? The one that practices basic hygiene or the one that doesn't? And you have to look at this interface between religious beliefs and practices and science and technology and healthcare, because it's a really important intersection.
So are there ethical norms that you've observed that seem to exist throughout history?
The interesting thing is people think that you can write down 10 commandments and that those are eternal and ethereal. And so look, one of those commandments is thou shalt not kill, period. There is no ambiguity. There is no footnote. There is no 400 pages of legal disclosures behind it that say, except in the case of X, Y, or Z. Except that when you read the documents that go behind it, that fundamental commandment gets modified to say, unless if they are the enemy, unless if they have committed adultery, unless if they have done mixed textiles, unless if, and it's just unbelievable how quickly what is a very clear commandment gets fragmented to the point where I don't think the chaplains on Marine boot camps are telling the newly minted Marines, thou shalt not kill. And there's got to be a really big dissonance between that commandment and the other stuff. So even in cases where you think this scripture is on my side, be careful which version and translation and interpretation you're reading.
So you used slavery as an example of the sort of evolution of ethics over time. We had a few questions that I think kind of boil down to the idea of, do you think there are ways that ethics might revert through AI and genetics? Might we build sort of future conscious slaves through those technologies?
You got to be really careful with technology because it flywheels. And when stuff starts to move at an exponential rate, and we are a very primitive species that evolves very slowly, you really want sort of a symbiosis between what you can do and understanding the consequences and having some degree of control. There's all kinds of examples of unintended consequences. And when you think of AI and programming AI as a solution, you have to think of all those little genie jokes that you used to have when you were a kid in high school, and you'd ask the genie for X, and the genie would do something awful. And, AI can do that. So we have this massive power. We're scaling that massive power. And that's why it's so important that we look forward as well as backwards and listen to one another instead of saying, I know what my position is on AI, or I know what my position is on ethics, or I know what my position is on reproduction. Because this is going to be an iterative process, and it's probably going to look like the chess programs, where a good chess program can beat the best chess player in the world. But it's very hard for a chess program to beat a really good chess program with a human being working alongside. And that's kind of where you want to move the system, because I am so excited understanding how horrible stuff is now with COVID and politics and everything else. I would love to go into a machine that would allow me to wake up 100 years from now. Because I want to see where this beginning exploration of space plays out. I want to see where AI plays out. And there's going to be some stuff that goes horribly wrong. But on the whole, none of us would be better off being born in the 1900s on average, in the 1800s, in the year 1000, in the year 0. It might be interesting, but we would not be better off if we were born in the John Rawls sense at random. I think with ups and downs, with chutes and ladders, I'm an optimistic curmudgeon. I think we have power. We have the power to do more right. We certainly have power to do more wrong. That's why ethics is so important. That's why humility and listening to people is just so important in this thing.
So do you think that globalization leads to a convergence of human ethics?
I don't know if we're going to converge or not. I mean, it's a question like, what's the internet going to look like in a decade? Are you going to have a Chinese internet, a European internet, an American internet? Are you going to have some of the communitarian values that have allowed China to come after COVID much more effectively versus the individualistic values, state by state, city by city, that we're applying in the US? And there's a lot of stuff wrong with the way that human rights and ethics and decisions are made in China. But there's a lot of stuff wrong in the way that we are treating people inside our own system. And there's a lot of stuff wrong in the way we're dealing with coronavirus. And there's a lot of stuff wrong in the way in which we allow people to go hungry during this crisis or lose their shelter, because we have more than enough, right? And I think this is going to lead to a questioning of the rules of capitalism, which were based on, it's the allocation of scarce resources. We just don't have enough. Well, you know what? We've got enough vaccines. We've got enough antibiotics, tents, food, calories. The fig leaf of we didn't treat people better because we didn't have enough, that's basically going away. And we'll be judged for that. That I think was going to be one of the great wrongs of our time.
We had a lot of questions around, I think, this basic idea of right and wrong. And I think that it seems like a fair amount of your talk kind of pointed out a sliding scale there. How does one identify a basic right and a basic wrong in your mind?
So to pick a completely random book or movie title, I wouldn't do it as right, wrong. I'd do it as 50 Shades of Grey. And there's stuff that is a lot more towards this, and there's stuff that's a lot more towards that. And I think it's almost like calculus, where you're iterating towards the curve. And I think we're learning gradually, and by the way, we better be learning, because the technologies we have allow us to warm the planet. The technologies and the stuff we accept today, imagine, again, you're put into a tube and you wake up in 100 years, and humanity's been smart enough to do away with nuclear weapons. So imagine trying to explain to people the logic of why we thought it was okay for 6 or 7 individuals to have the power to destroy the planet. So 6 or 7 individuals have their finger on the button and can choose to destroy the planet. In what moral universe is that defensible in 100 years? And we kind of take it for granted, and we say, well, that's the way things are, and that's the nature of deterrence, and we've got mutual assured destruction. And people are going to look at you and say, in what universe was mutual assured destruction okay? In what universe did you, as a society, as a world, as a country, think that that kind of power in an individual's hands is fine?
And it seems like a lot, not all, but a lot of what you described, there's a march towards a progressive or positive outcome as it relates to technology or as it relates to human knowledge. What are some, you pointed out a couple in your talk, I think, but what are some other examples for you where you have specific concerns about regression in the future?
So look, I'm terrified by some of the pictures of women in Iran and Afghanistan circa 1970, right? Because the level of education was higher, the freedoms were much higher, the respect was much higher. What people don't understand and what's at stake here, and the reason why this debate is so important, is because it's really easy to tear a nation and a community apart. It's really easy to convince 51% that the other 49% are the others, and that you never want to associate with those people. That those people are pedophiles or baby killers or troglodytes or backward, Nazis. And when you spend billions of dollars doing that, you rip communities to pieces. And what's happened in Europe is you've tripled the number of flags, borders, and anthems in 1 century. And you're continuing to do that. So you're convincing the Catalans and the Basques and the Welsh and the Northern Italians and the Walloons and the Corsicans. They don't belong as part of that community. And we in the US think that we are immune to that. So when I have the privilege of lecturing at places like West Point, the first question I ask the cadets is how many stars will be in the US flag in 50 years? And that's a gut punch to a cadet because they're willing to give their lives for the flag that's on their shoulder. And before they get too angry, the next question I ask them is, tell me, exactly how many presidents of the United States have been born under the same number of stars that they were buried under? So there's a little log cabin somewhere, there's a flag, a baby's born, becomes president, very sad cortege down Pennsylvania Avenue. There has never been one president of the United States buried under the same number of stars he was born under, ever in US history. So it's not as crazy a question as it seems. And if we want to convince each other that we would never want to talk to those people over there, that they are not part of us, that they are not part of a community, we will achieve that. And we will rip this nation apart. And that's where this part about humility, forgiveness, and understanding, a very quick way of visualizing this. Your 16-year-old daughter, you have a trip that's an emergency, you need a chaperone for the weekend. Who do you want to leave your 16-year-old daughter with for the weekend? Do you want to leave her with Donald Trump or Barack Obama? And after you give me that answer, now let me ask you, with Paul Ryan or Anthony Weiner? Right? And you just...
Sorry, so this is a little bit of a switch. One of an actual astronomer asked what the plus minus 36 means on the slide of the spiral gallery or galaxy.
So there's one science article which argues that there should be at least 36 intelligent civilizations in our galaxy. And again, the degree, the bar, the interval of confidence on that is very, very high. But the fascinating thing about this is I had the privilege of meeting Frank Drake, who came up with the Drake equation, where you multiplied, how many planets are out there and how many planets are, within this distance and how many have water and how many have this. And the fascinating thing about the Drake equation is something that seemed almost impossible, which is life on other planets, becomes much more likely every week with new discoveries. And so, you're watching the Drake equation shift towards a much higher likelihood of life. So that number 36 may actually be a really low number. It just happened to be based on an article that I thought had some reasonable assumptions.
So another question that Lisa here asked that is we get a lot in these conversations is, what are some examples of sort of media? Let's maybe go to pop media if you have them, that you think really do a good job of exploring some ethical conundrums that you deal with in your work.
You know, let me start by saying I'm one of the luckiest people alive, because every morning, if you're dealing, most of my life is not dealing with ethics. Most of my life is trying to figure out where gene research is going and where genomics is going and where synthetic life is going. And for the past few years, I've been transiting into brain research and working on synthetic neurobiology. Because I think when you change the brain, then you change humanity and all kinds of interesting things happen. And ethics happened to be a question that I was always asked. So what I thought was going to be a 1 month write something about ethics became a 6-year, wow, I really have to understand this, which is why this book came out. In that context, you find ethics in every science article you read, whether it is explicit or not. You find ethics and the ethical assumptions in every article you read about economics, about investing, about entertainment, about how we portray the others in political campaigns. I didn't understand because I thought I knew right from wrong, and I'd simply say, here are the guidelines for genomics or synthetic neurobiology, how damn complicated and interesting this topic is. And the more you dig, the more you go, wow, okay, so the underlying assumption is this, but what if this changes? And that's why it became 6 years, and that's why it got so interesting. And that's why, you know, this is one of the most important conversations we're going to have, because we cannot face the existential threats we've got on climate change, on nukes, on inequality, if we don't think very carefully about the ethics of the system as a whole, right? Who gets hurt? Who gets helped? What does geoengineering the planet do? Where are you going to geoengineer? Who's going to have the power to do that? And the really interesting thing about humanity is we're distributing power through science to the point where individuals can generate the wealth of a small or medium-sized country in a decade. 3 companies in China that didn't exist 20 years ago have created an economy the size of the GDP of Mexico. And when you have that kind of leverage and power, your ability to change things scales very rapidly. So does your ability to destroy things. And that's why it's so important we don't leave people behind, that we don't isolate people, that we don't take whole classes of people and say, you don't belong in our world. Because if you leave big chunks of people that are really angry, the destructive power they can wield, if they're not part of a global community, is increasing exponentially per year.
So I think we have time for one more question. Of course, some of our audience members will be able to join you for the sort of in-person video Q&A in a moment. But for this Q&A, I'm so sorry if we didn't get to your question. We have a ton that is a lot of great questions in here. But to close out this session, you know, there are a lot of, you know, you identified gay marriage as an example. There are a lot of public ethical questions that sort of reach a tipping point and suddenly change maybe a lot faster than one might expect. Do you have any way of sort of identifying those tipping points? Are there any things that you think might change in the same way, change quickly in the same way that that issue did?
So one of the most interesting questions is, why are we still doing so many unethical things? there's a spectacular cartoon of, I think it's by Bizarro, of a pharmacist handing over a paper bag to a client and saying, your money or your life. So in what universe is it okay to triple the price of insulin and to say, if you can't pay for this, you die? Right? And there's more than enough insulin. The original insulin patent was done in Toronto and was given away to humanity so that people would have it, not so the doctor got rich. And somehow we've ended up in the system where we triple the price of insulin. So there's a lot of things in healthcare that are fundamentally broken and wrong that we're going to look back on and say, why did you think that was okay? There's a lot of stuff in education. How is it that anyone on this call can get 3 credit cards, go out to Rodeo Drive, go on an absolute crazy shopping spree, buy a Maserati, go broke, and have their debts wiped out? But you can't do that with education, right? Education loans are structured like indentured servitude, and it's almost impossible to get out of that. So there's no risk for these predatory diploma mills because they're going to get paid anyway. And so I think look for the places where the costs are increasing, where there's less and less protection to the individual. And the 2 obvious ones are healthcare and education. Those are things we have to go after. It's absolutely unacceptable what we're doing to society. And you can't work. You can't take care of your kids if you're not healthy. You can't work. You can't take care of your parents and kids if you're paying off loans for something that you could write off if there were Ferragamo shoes, but not if it had a diploma attached.
Well, for right now, we're going to have to end it there, but a number of you will see us in the other video session. Juan, thank you for an incredible talk today. And there's Anne to wrap it up as well.
Well, and I've been sitting here just thinking, and I have to tell you, Juan, that we've all been texting back and forth during this as well. So you've got all of us in the same sort of like, oh, wow. So this has been a really great event. And I also think I know I'm going to be giving somebody the gift of your book for this holiday season. So that also has helped me out as well. So thank you very much. And we don't want to keep you because I know you have someplace else to be. You've got another link to click to go elsewhere as Rick and I wrap up here. And we thank all of you for being here.
Yeah, thanks,
we do want to tell you that, of course, we are back next week. It will be our last event of 2020, but we've got a good event for you. We have we have kind of a mixtape event. Some of our really wonderful presenters back because we always have an excruciatingly short amount of time that we give people to talk. So we're giving them just a little more time to talk, to get to some of the things they weren't able to get to the first time around, and to give you an update in some cases on where things stand with their science, because new things have happened.
We know all those folks who emailed us and said, wow, that was a great speaker. And
yes.
Track of that. And now we're going to do like our best of finale for 2020.
Exactly. I've invited people back to give another talk and another group of fantastic people that were on our stage. So come back next week. The invitation will be going out. Sachi pretty much hits send as soon as we're done here. Then the next one goes out. So please come back. And again, thank you so much for being here today for obviously what was a great talk with Juan. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays.